He was a billionaire, moments from closing a $50 million deal. She was the waitress, refilling his water, completely invisible. But she saw the one tiny detail everyone else missed. As the billionaire reached for his pen, she leaned in, her job on the line, and whispered 2 sentences in perfect German that shattered the entire room, exposing a lie that went deeper than anyone could imagine. This is the story of how a single whisper saved a fortune and destroyed an empire. L'Orangerie wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theater. Located on the 54th floor of a glass and steel monolith in downtown Chicago, it boasted 3 Michelin stars and a waiting list that politicians and tech moguls battled for. The carpets were so thick they absorbed all sound, leaving only the polite murmur of powerful people and the delicate chime of silver on porcelain. Clara Weber knew her role in this theater. She was a ghost. At 29, she moved with an economy of motion that spoke of long, grueling shifts. Her black uniform was immaculate, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun, and her expression was one of absolute, neutral politeness. She was invisible, and that was the point. The clientele of l'Orangerie didn't pay $500 a plate to see the staff. They paid to be seen by each other. Tonight, the theater was at its peak. The coveted corner booth, table 12, was occupied. Clara had felt the shift in the room's gravity when they arrived. The man at the head of the table was Jacob Thorne. He wasn't a celebrity, but he owned the companies that paid celebrities. He was old money from the East Coast, with a face that looked carved from granite, and a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed to be a part of him. He looked bored, stressed, and profoundly wealthy. Across from him sat 2 men. The first was Mason van der Velde, a man who smiled with all his teeth. He was European, handsome in a slick, curated way, and wore a Rolex that Clara recognized as being worth more than her entire college debt. He was the salesman, his voice smooth and reassuring. The third man was Dr. Heinrich Müller. He was severe, with small, wire-rimmed glasses and a tweed jacket that seemed out of place. He was the expert, the academic brought in to add a sheen of legitimacy. Clara's station was nearby, and she was assigned to assist the table's main server. Her only job was water and bread. The provenance is, of course, impeccable, van der Velde was saying, his English laced with a faint Dutch accent. He gestured to Dr. Muller. Dr. Muller traced it from the Thurn und Taxis estate sale in 1953, back through a private Swiss collector, all the way to its origin. The Augsburg workshop, Dr. Muller added, his voice a dry rasp. He spoke with a thick, almost parodic German accent. Unmistakable. A 16th century masterpiece, Mr. Thorne. A one-of-a-kind commission. Jacob Thorne said nothing. He simply steepled his fingers, his blue eyes fixed on the velvet-lined mahogany box on the table. He was a man buying, not a man being sold to. Clara moved in silently. Her pitcher of chilled water, held in a linen-wrapped hand, hovered over Thorne's glass. "Still or sparkling, sir?" Thorne waved a hand dismissively. "Still." He didn't look at her. As she poured, her eyes flickered, against her will, to the conversation. They were speaking English, but Dr. Müller had just used a German word, Werkstattmarke, workshop mark. Clara's posture stiffened, just for a fraction of a second. That word. It was a word she hadn't heard in 5 years, a word that belonged to another life, a life where she wasn't a ghost in a black uniform, a life where she was the expert, not the help. She retreated, her heart hammering for a reason she couldn't explain. She tried to dismiss it. It was just a job. Her only job was to pay the interest on the crippling student loans from a PhD she had never finished. a PhD from Heidelberg in German Renaissance metalwork. She went back to polishing glasses, the sound of her own breathing loud in her ears. She could still hear them. The purity of the gold, Van der Velde purred. The cut of the central sapphire. It is, as you Americans say, a unicorn. The price is significant, Thorne said, his first real contribution. His voice was a low baritone. Greatness is always significant, Mr. Thorne, Van der Velde countered smoothly. 50 million is not a price. It is an investment in history. Clara watched from the shadows of the service station. The manager, Antoine, a man who survived on his nerves, was also watching, fluttering near the table like a nervous moth. If you will, Van der Velde said, his voice dropping. He placed his hands on the mahogany box. Dr. Muller, the honors. With a dramatic flourish, Dr. Muller unlatched the box and opened the lid, angling it toward Jacob Thorne. Even from 10 feet away, Clara could see it. The Augsburg seal. It was a heavy, intricate piece of gold, perhaps the size of a man's fist, designed to be a personal seal for a prince or a bishop. It was dominated by a central, cabochon-cut sapphire the size of a robin's egg, deep and blue. The gold was worked into a complex tableau of heraldic beasts and Latin inscriptions. Jacob Thorne leaned in, his bored expression replaced by a flash of genuine avarice. He was hooked. Clara looked at it, and her stomach dropped. It wasn't a feeling. It wasn't a guess. It was a cold, hard, academic certainty. From the way the light hit the patina, from the impossible depth of the blue, the damn thing was a fake. And as Mason van der Velde passed a leather-bound folio with the payment transfer details to the billionaire, Clara realized the deal was about to close. Right now. She had maybe 30 seconds to decide if she was going to let a man she'd never met lose $50 million, or if she was going to detonate her entire, fragile life. Clara's mind was racing, a torrent of academic data flooding a brain she had tried to numb for 5 years. The sapphire. That was the key. Dr. Muller had called it cabochon cut, which was correct for the period. But the color. That impossible, velvety, cornflower blue. It looked like a modern, heat-treated sapphire from Burma or Sri Lanka, not a 16th century stone, which would almost certainly have been a darker, inkier, untreated stone from the Kashmir region, or more likely, a much paler specimen, the patina. The aging on the gold was too uniform. It lay on the surface like a blanket, a perfect, even layer of dark tarnish in the crevices. Real 16th century patina was chaotic. It built up in layers, rubbed off on the high points, and was a chemical mess of centuries of handling. What she was looking at was a chemical application. Potassium sulfide, probably, applied in a lab last month. The craftsmanship, Dr. Muller was saying, pointing with a silver pen. You see the Werkstatt marker here, by the griffin's claw? That is the mark of Hans von Reutlingen, the master of the Augsburg Guild. Thorne nodded, clearly impressed by the names. He reached for the pen sitting on the transfer document. Clara's blood ran cold. Hans von Reutlingen. That was the moment. That was the detail that turned a suspicion into a certainty. Hans von Reutlingen worked primarily in silver and was based in Aachen, not Augsburg. The expert who just used the German word for workshop mark had confused two of the most famous German smiths of the era. It was a mistake no first-year graduate student would make. It was a trap, and Jacob Thorne was walking right into it. Clara picked up her water pitcher. Her hand wasn't shaking, but her heart was a fist pounding against her ribs. Don't do it, Clara. It's not your business. It's his money. You'll be fired. You'll be blacklisted. You'll be homeless. She saw the smooth, predatory smile on Mason van der Velde's face as Thorne's hand hovered over the paper. To hell with it. She moved. She didn't run. She glided. She approached table 12 with the same ghostly efficiency as before. Thorne didn't look up, his eyes on the prize. Van der Velde barely registered her. Clara reached to pour the water. With a tiny, imperceptible twitch of her wrist, she tripped. A single cold drop of water splashed from the pitcher, landing directly on the back of Jacob Thorne's hand. He flinched, startled, and looked up at her, his eyes flashing with pure, undiluted annoyance. "What the hell?" Antoine, the manager, saw it and froze, his face turning ashen. "My deepest apologies, sir," Clara said, her voice a perfect, servile whisper. She leaned in close, dabbing at his hand with her clean linen cloth. She was now shielded from the other two men by Thorne's own body. She kept her eyes down, the picture of a terrified waitress, but her whisper was not for them. It was for him, and it was not in English. She spoke in flawless, academic, Hochdeutsch, High German. "Pardon me, sir, but this isn't a real one." Jacob Thorne froze. His annoyance vanished, replaced by a look of profound, cold shock. He stared at her, really stared at her, for the first time. Van der Velde, sensing the pause, leaned in. "Is everything all right, Jacob? A small spill?" Thorne didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Clara. He replied, his own German hesitant but passable, "What are you saying?" Clara didn't look up from dabbing his hand. She kept her voice just above the ambient sound of the restaurant. "It's a fake," she whispered urgently. "The sapphire is heat-treated, the cut is modern, and Hans von Reutlingen never worked in Augsburg. It's a scam." She finished, pulled the cloth away, and stepped back, her face once again a perfect mask of neutrality. "My apologies again for the spill, sir." The entire interaction had taken less than 10 seconds. Jacob Thorne sat completely still. The pen was motionless in his hand. Mason van der Velde's smile faltered. "Jacob, is there a problem?" Dr. Muller, who had clearly understood the German exchange, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His face was a mask of pale, sweating terror. Jacob Thorne slowly, deliberately, placed the pen down. He did not look at the scammers. He looked directly at the waitress, who was now standing respectfully, hands clasped behind her back. "Tell me," Thorne said, his voice quiet but carrying the sudden weight of the room. "What is your name?" Before Clara could answer, Van der Velde, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified recognition, finally looked, really looked, at the waitress. His professional charm evaporated, replaced by a snarl. "You! I know you! Clara Weber!" The name hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Clara's blood turned to ice. This wasn't just a random scammer. This was Mason Rennert. The slicked-back hair, the expensive watch, the fake Dutch accent. It was all a costume. 5 years ago, he was Mason Rennert, a rival graduate student at Heidelberg, a man who was all charm and no substance, a man who saw academia not as a pursuit of truth, but as a path to wealth and prestige. A man who had seen her research, her passion, her talent, and decided to take it. "Mason," she said, her voice no longer the whisper of a servant. It was cold, clear, and sharp. "You're still selling fakes, I see. You've just moved up to a higher price point." Jacob Thorne's head swiveled slowly from Clara to Mason. His expression was no longer one of avarice or annoyance. It was the face of a predator that had just realized the trap was not for him. "Mason?" Thorne asked, his voice deceptively soft. "You two are acquainted?" Mason Rennert, Van der Velde, leaped to his feet, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. The entire restaurant was quiet now, watching. "This is absurd. This waitress. She's a disgraced student, a fraud. She was expelled from Heidelberg for falsifying data. She's a known liar. She's probably trying to extort you, Mr. Thorne. Security." Dr. Mueller, meanwhile, was trying to quietly close the lid of the mahogany box. "Don't touch that," Clara snapped, and the man flinched, his hand recoiling. She turned her attention to the expert. "And you," she said, switching back to German. "Dr. Mueller, who are you, really? Because you're no doctor. The Werkstattmarke of Hans von Reutlingen is a stylized HR monogram, often with a crossed keys motif from Aachen. He never used a griffin. You confused him with Hans von Augsburg, didn't you? A common amateur mistake." "This is an outrage," Mueller blustered in heavily accented English, his face crimson. "You're right," Thorne said, his voice cutting through the panic. "It is." He didn't call for security. He didn't have to. Two large men in dark suits, who had been sitting at a discreet table by the bar, stood up simultaneously. They were not restaurant security. They were his security. "Gentlemen," Thorne said, standing to his full height, "it appears our little negotiation is over. My associates will show you to a private room where we can clarify a few things. Please leave the box." Mason Rennett's face was a mask of panic and fury. "You're going to believe her? A failed academic working as a waitress?" "She's right about the sapphire," Thorne said calmly. "I've been collecting stones for 20 years. The color, it was too good. Too modern. I was willing to overlook it because I wanted to believe it. But she," he motioned to Clara, "just confirmed it. And she," he added, his voice dropping, "knew about Hans von Reutlingen. I did not." Thorne's security team, led by a man named Agent Davies, flanked Mason and the trembling Dr. Mueller. "Mr. Thorne, you can't do this! This is kidnapping!" Mason shrieked, his polished accent gone, replaced by a nasal American whine. "It's a citizen's arrest for attempted fraud," Davies replied, his voice flat. "Please, sir. This way." As the two scammers were firmly escorted away, the restaurant's manager, Antoine, finally found his voice and his feet. He rushed to the table, his face a puddle of professional dread. "Mr. Thorne! Mr. Thorne! I cannot apologize enough. This is a disgrace. He turned his frantic, terrified gaze on Clara. "You!" Antoine hissed, his voice shaking with rage. "You are finished. You accosted a guest. You ruined this dinner. You are fired. Get your things and get out." Clara stood tall. She had just unmasked her personal nemesis and saved a billionaire $50 million. She felt a strange, terrifying calm. "Yes, Monsieur Antoine." "No," Jacob Thorne said. Antoine froze. Mr. Thorne." Thorne looked at Clara, his gaze analytical, as if he were appraising an artifact, but this time he was seeing its true value. "You are fired, Miss Weber," he said, his voice formal. Clara's brief moment of triumph evaporated. "What?" Antoine nodded vigorously. "Yes, exactly, she is. Because," Thorne continued, cutting him off, "you can't work for him anymore. You're coming with me." He looked at Antoine. "Add a 20% gratuity for the inconvenience, and have her final check sent to my office. My assistant, Sarah, will be in touch." He turned to his primary security agent. "Davies, have Ms. Weber escorted. Not to the exit. To my car." Clara stood, stunned, as Antoine's jaw worked open and closed. "Mr. Thorne," Clara managed, I don't understand." "You will," Thorne said. He picked up the Augsburg seal from the box, weighing it in his hand. "You knew what this was in 10 seconds. I've had a team of experts vetting this for 2 months, and they all missed it." He tossed the fake back into the box. "I have a feeling, Miss Weber, that you and I have a great deal to discuss. Your past, for one. And," he gave a thin smile, "your future." Clara Weber was not escorted to the staff exit. She was escorted by the stone-faced Agent Davies through the main dining room, past the stunned and silent patrons. She was still in her black and white uniform, her apron still on. She was taken down the private elevator, a privilege reserved for VIPs, and out into the concrete chill of the underground parking garage. The garage was silent, smelling of ozone and cold cement. Parked in a private bay was a car that seemed to suck the light out of the air around it, a black, armoured-looking Bentley Mulsanne. "Mr. Thorne will be down momentarily," Davies said, opening the rear door. "Please wait inside." Clara slid onto the leather seat. It was softer than any bed she had ever owned. The door closed with the sound of a bank vault ceiling, and she was plunged into absolute, tomb-like silence. This was a nightmare, or a dream. She couldn't tell. She had just lost her job, confronted the man who ruined her life, and been essentially kidnapped by one of the richest men in America. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline ebbing, leaving a cold dread. What did he want? To sue her for ruining his deal? To thank her? The silence was broken 10 minutes later, when the other rear door opened. Jacob Thorne slid in, followed by a woman in a sharp pantsuit holding a tablet. This must be Sarah, his assistant. "Ms. Weber," Thorne said, as the car began to move silently through the garage. "Mr. Thorne. Sarah, please get me everything you can on a Mason Rennet, Rennert, cross-reference with Van de Velde and Augsburg. Also, get me the University of Heidelberg's disciplinary records for the last 10 years, specifically for the Arts and Antiquities Department. I want to know why a Clara Weber was expelled." "Yes, Mr. Thorne," Sarah said, her fingers already flying across the tablet. Clara flinched. "Mr. Thorne, I can explain that." "I know you can," he said, turning to her. The car's interior lights cast his face in shadow. "That's why you're here. Start talking. Who is Mason Rennet? And how, exactly, did a waitress from l'Orangerie become one of the world's foremost experts on 16th century German metalwork?" And so, as the Bentley sped through the nighttime streets of Chicago, Clara told him. She told him everything. She spoke of her passion for the subject, her groundbreaking doctoral thesis on identifying forged patinas using chemical and microscopic analysis. She spoke of her mentor, the brilliant and revered Professor Ernst Albrecht, who had encouraged her. And she spoke of Mason Rennet. "He was a fellow student," Clara explained, her voice gaining strength as she revisited the facts. "He was always looking for shortcuts. My research. It was my life's work. I'd found a way to spot fakes that were fooling even the big auction houses. I told Professor Albrecht. I was naive. I even shared my preliminary data with Mason in a study group. He stole it," Thorne stated. "It wasn't a question. Worse. He copied my entire methodology, published a paper under his own name, and then he framed me. He planted falsified data in my research archives, data that proved my own methodology was a fraud. He presented it to the doctoral board. He claimed I was the one trying to pass off fake discoveries." "And Professor Albrecht, your mentor?" Clara's voice broke, just for a second. He sided with Mason. He said my work was emotional and unsubstantiated. He was the deciding vote. I was expelled, blacklisted. The academic world is small, Mr. Thorne. When Heidelberg expels you for fraud, you're finished. Mason got his PhD. I got $500,000 in student debt and a job clearing tables. Thorne was silent for a long time, watching the city lights flash across his severe features. "He didn't just steal your research, Ms. Weber. He stole your name," Thorne said. "He left me with nothing," Clara whispered. The car slowed, not at an office building, but at a private hangar at O'Hare. A sleek, white Gulfstream jet sat waiting on the tarmac. "Mr. Thorne, where are you taking me?" Clara asked, a new wave of panic rising. "I'm going to New York. You're coming with me," he said. He looked at her uniform. "Sarah, arrange for some appropriate clothes to be on the plane, and clear my morning." "Sir, you have the Japanese consortium. They can wait," Thorne said. He turned back to Clara. "You were wrong about one thing, Ms. Weber. He didn't leave you with nothing. He left you with a very specific and very valuable set of skills. He also left you with a motive." "A motive for what?" Thorne smiled, and it was a cold, sharp, dangerous thing. Revenge, or as I prefer to call it, market correction. "Sir, this forgery," he said, gesturing back toward the city, "is not an isolated incident. My foundation, the Thorne Preservation Trust, has been hemorrhaging money for 3 years. We've been buying fakes, sophisticated fakes, a lost Rembrandt drawing, a pre-Columbian relic, a Romanov jewelry piece. Every time the provenance seems perfect. Every time we're fooled. Until 6 months later, when the real item surfaces, and we're left holding $1 million copy." He leaned in. "Rennert is a salesman. He's not the artist. He's the front man for a ring. A ring that is so good they are rewriting history and stealing billions. I've been hunting them, and tonight you just handed me their lead salesman." I'm glad I could help," Clara said, bewildered. "I'm not looking for help, Ms. Weber. I'm looking for a weapon." The car stopped at the steps of the jet. "I have a department," Thorne said, "full of PhDs just like you. They're brilliant and they're all useless. Because they're academics, they look for what's right. I need someone who knows how to look for what's wrong. Someone who has seen the inside of the scam." He opened his door. "I'll pay off your entire student debt. I'll give you a salary that's triple what your Professor Albrecht makes. I'll give you a lab, a team, and an unlimited budget. In exchange, I want 2 things." Clara stared at him, breathless. 1. You will be the new head of acquisitions and provenance for the Thorne Trust. Nothing gets bought, nothing gets touched, until you say it's real. 2. You will find the artist, the forger, the man behind Rennert and Muller. You will find his workshop, and you will dismantle this entire organization from the ground up. He stood on the tarmac, the wind from the jet engines whipping his coat. "You're not a waitress anymore, Ms. Weber. You just got your doctorate back. Do we have a deal?" The next 48 hours were a blur. Clara Weber, the waitress, vanished. She was scrubbed from the L'Orangerie employee files. Her student debt, a mountainous $512,000, was paid in a single wire transfer. A new identity was forged. Clara Weber, Director of Provenance. She was given a temporary home in a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, a company car, and a wardrobe of bespoke suits and dresses that Sarah, Thorne's terrifyingly efficient assistant, had procured. But the real transformation happened at the Thorne Trust headquarters, a black granite tower on Park Avenue. Her new office was not an office. It was a laboratory. It had a scanning electron microscope, an X-ray fluorescence spectrometer, and gas chromatography mass spectrometry machines. It was, Clara realized with a jolt, the exact lab she had designed in her doctoral thesis. Thorne was not a man who did things by halves. On the 3rd day, Agent Davies placed the mahogany box on her new lab table. The Augsburg seal sat under the harsh white lights, looking cheap and theatrical. "Mr. Thorne sends his compliments," Davies said. "He's in Tokyo. He said you'd know where to start." "I do," Clara said, snapping on a pair of latex gloves. She spent the first day just looking. She examined the seal under 50x magnification. Just as she'd thought. The carvings were too sharp. A real 16th century piece would have softer edges from centuries of wear. These edges were crisp, likely cast from a mold, and then aged with a tool. The maker's mark, the griffin, was a complete invention, but the method of its application was interesting. It was stamped with a heated punch, then filled with a chemical oxidizer to make it look old. But the sapphire, that was the artist's signature. She ran the XRF analysis. The gold was 22 carat, which was correct. But the alloys, it contained trace amounts of titanium and vanadium, modern refining byproducts. A 16th century piece would have impurities of silver and copper, but not titanium. Sloppy, she thought, or arrogant. They assumed no one would look this closely. She spent the next week not on the object, but on the people. She now had Jacob Thorne's resources. She pulled every financial record for Mason Rennert. He was a ghost until 5 years ago, when he suddenly opened 3 different shell corporations in Delaware, Panama, and the Cayman Islands. Alpine Heritage Limited. That was the one. She cross-referenced Rennert's known travel with the sales of other high-profile forgeries. He was in Paris a week before the lost Rembrandt drawing sold. He was in Rome 2 weeks before the Etruscan vase was acquired by a museum in Getty. He wasn't just a salesman. He was the courier. She then focused on Dr. Heinrich Müller. His name was, of course, a fake. A facial recognition scan run by Thorne's team got a hit. His real name was Stefan Janssen, a disgraced jeweler from Antwerp, Belgium. He had been disbarred from the Jewelers Guild 10 years ago for switching out clients' diamonds with cubic zirconia, a perfect, cut-rate expert. But neither of them was the artist. Rennert was the face, Janssen was the support. Who was the forger? Who had the skills to do the metalwork, the chemistry for the patina, and the gemological knowledge to almost pull off the sapphire? It had to be someone with deep academic knowledge, someone who knew exactly which corners to cut. Clara stared at the analysis report of the patina. Potassium sulfide. It was a common, almost cliché, aging agent, but the way it was applied, bonded with a specific resin to ensure it only clung to the crevices. She had seen it before. Her blood ran cold. She remembered, 5 years ago, in the Heidelberg student lab. She had been experimenting with patinas. She'd failed, creating a thick, ugly black crust on a piece of brass. Mason had laughed at her. But Professor Albrecht, he had come over, looked at her failed experiment, and smiled. Ah, the potassium sulfide trap. You've oversaturated it, Miss Weber. The true artist's trick is in the binder. A little shellac, perhaps, thinned with ethanol. It gives the tarnish grip. He had shown her. He'd mixed the compound, painted it on, and then gently buffed the high points. The result was a perfect, aged patina in under an hour. His patina. Clara's hands began to shake. It couldn't be. Professor Ernst Albrecht, the most respected name in German antiquities, the man who wrote the textbook. He hadn't just sided with Mason. He hadn't just been fooled. Clara pulled up the Alpine Heritage Limited. Shell Company records. The incorporation papers were signed by a proxy in Panama. But the funding, the seed money for the account had been wired 6 years ago from a private bank in Zurich. The account holder's name was restricted. Clara used Thorne's credentials, high-level security clearance that bordered on illegal. She requested the account holder's name. 5 minutes later, an email pinged. 1 line. Account holder. Dr. Ernst Albrecht, Heidelberg, Germany. Clara leaned back in her chair, the breath punched out of her. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a coincidence. Professor Albrecht, her brilliant, kind, encouraging mentor, was the true villain. He hadn't just abandoned her. He hadn't just let Mason frame her. He had orchestrated it. She had been his best student. She had been the only one smart enough to figure out his methods. Her new research, her thesis on spotting forgeries. It wasn't just an academic threat. It was a direct threat to his multi-million-dollar criminal empire. He hadn't expelled her. He had silenced her. He had destroyed his only competition to protect his master artist. Himself. "My God," Clara whispered to the empty lab. "It was you, all along." Clara didn't hesitate. She didn't mourn the betrayal. That could come later. Now there was only ice in her veins. She picked up the phone and called Jacob Thorne in Tokyo. "It's Albrecht," she said, without preamble, when he answered. There was a pause on the line. "Ernst Albrecht, the man who wrote the Augsburg Masters. The very same. He's the forger. Rennert and Janssen are just his delivery boys. He's been running this ring for at least a decade, right under the nose of the entire academic world. He's using his position to validate his own fakes." "And he sacrificed you," Thorne said, his voice grim. He silenced the only person who was getting close to the truth, his own student. "Clara, this is a monumental accusation. You have proof, hard proof. I have the chemical signature from the Augsburg seal. It matches a technique he personally taught me, and I have his name on the bank account for the shell company Rennert uses. It's him, Jacob, I'm certain." Another long pause. "Good," Thorne said, "because destroying a mere salesman like Rennert is a waste of time. Destroying a legend, that's a statement." "What's the plan?" Clara asked. "He's arrogant," Thorne mused. "He believes he's smarter than everyone. He's been getting away with it for so long, he thinks he's untouchable. We're not going to use the police. Not yet. We're going to use his own greed to expose him." "A sting," Clara said. "A masterpiece," Thorne corrected. "He used a fake to try and trap me. We'll use a real one to trap him." The plan was audacious, and it unfolded over the next 2 weeks. First, Thorne, through a proxy, acquired a minor, but indisputably authentic, 16th century silver chalice made by the real Hans von Reutlingen. It was a piece Clara knew well from her studies. It had been in a small private collection in Brussels. Second, Thorne's foundation let a rumor slip into the high-end art world. Jacob Thorne was still smarting from the Augsburg seal fiasco. He was now furious, embarrassed, and obsessed with acquiring a partner piece. He was, the rumor went, looking for something from the Augsburg school, and he was willing to overpay to restore his reputation. Third, Clara, as the new head of provenance, publicly published a preliminary analysis of the Augsburg seal, but she deliberately made a key mistake. She correctly identified it as a fake, but she attributed the forgery to a known and long-dead 20th century forger, essentially closing the case. "You're feeding him false information," Clara said to Thorne, understanding. "I'm telling him the bloodhound is off the scent," Thorne smiled. "I'm telling him it's safe to come out and play one more time." The bait was set. Now they had to get the artist to bite. They leaked to a high-end art broker in Zurich, a man they suspected Albrecht used, that Jacob Thorne was hosting a private, high-stakes auction in his New York penthouse. Only 3 other billionaires would be there. The centerpiece, the Hans von Reutlingen chalice, and they added, Thorne was actively seeking a companion piece to display with it. A commission. They waited. For a week, there was silence. Clara was a bundle of nerves, spending her days in the lab, her nights staring at the New York skyline. Then, the email came. Not to Thorne, but to Clara. The sender was Dr. Ernst Albrecht. "Dear Miss Weber, I was shocked and appalled to hear of the disgraceful events that led to your departure from Heidelberg. It seems I was gravely mistaken about Mr. Rennert. I have followed your new career with great interest, and am impressed by your resilience. By a remarkable coincidence, I have recently been advising a private collector who wishes to liquidate a piece that may be of profound interest to Mr. Thorne. It is a 16th century Augsburg ceremonial dagger, a piece I myself believe to be the sister piece to the very chalice Mr. Thorne has acquired. Perhaps, if you are amenable, we could meet, for old time's sake, and perhaps to correct an old injustice. Your old mentor, Ernst Clara, stared at the email. The audacity, the sheer, poisonous arrogance. He was using their shared past as leverage, pretending to correct an old injustice, while setting her up for his next con. He wasn't just the forger. He was good. She hit reply. Professor, it would be an honor. The meeting was set, not at the Thorne Trust, not at a gallery. At the request of Albrecht's cellar, the meeting would be at a secure, neutral location, a private vault in the basement of a bank on Wall Street. He's cautious, Thorne said, reading the email. He's not cautious enough, Clara replied. He's coming. Davies and his team will be wired. The vault will be covered by audio and video, but Clara, you'll be in that room alone with him. He's a cornered animal. No, Clara said, adjusting the collar of her new, sharp, silk blouse. He's not cornered. He's a predator, and he thinks I'm the bait. He's forgotten one thing. What's that? He taught me everything he knows, but he never learned what I know. The vault was 20 feet beneath Wall Street, a perfect cube of polished steel, marble, and soundproof glass. The air was cold, still, and filtered, carrying the scent of conditioned air and buried money. It was a place where fortunes were stored, not made. A sterile, silent tomb. This was Clara's stage. Her footsteps were silent on the marble floor. She was no longer Clara Weber, the invisible waitress. She was Ms. Weber, director of provenance, and she wore a dark blue suit that was tailored so perfectly it felt like armor. Her dark hair was no longer in a severe, servile bun, but in a sleek, professional chignon. She was not alone. In her ear, a tiny, almost invisible receiver, was the voice of Jacob Thorne, broadcast from a mobile command center in a truck parked 2 blocks away. He's in, Clara, Thorne's voice murmured, a ghost in her ear. We have high-definition video and audio. The room is hot. Davies and his team are in the adjoining corridor. It's your show. Clara took one, slow breath steadying her pulse. Then the heavy steel and glass door at the far end of the vault hissed open. Professor Ernst Albrecht walked in. He looked exactly as he had in her memory. He was a vision from her past, the same kind, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the same silver hair, the same elbow-patched tweed jacket that smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and old books. He was the most respected man in his field, the benevolent father of German antiquities. And he was a monster. He smiled when he saw her, a warm, paternal expression that 5 years ago would have made her feel safe. Now, it made her blood run cold. "Clara, my dear child," he said, walking toward her, his arms open for an embrace she did not accept. He converted the motion smoothly, clasping his hands together. "Look at you. Simply radiant. You have done so well for yourself. I am so terribly sorry about what happened with Mason. A dreadful business. He always lacked rigor. He was already at work, laying the foundation of his lie, re-establishing the old, comfortable dynamic. He, the wise mentor. She, the grateful student. It's in the past, Professor, Clara said. Her voice was cool even, and a full octave lower than the whisper she'd used at l'Orangerie. "I'm here for Mr. Thorne. He's very eager to see the piece." Albrecht's smile didn't waver. He was the master. Ah, yes, of course. Business. He turned to the heavy table in the center of the room, where a reinforced pelican case sat. When my client, a very private gentleman, you understand, showed this to me, I almost wept. A miracle, Clara. A true miracle. He unlatched the case. It was lost during the firebombing of Dresden. It surfaced in a private Swiss collection held by a family who had no idea what they possessed, until I, by chance, was consulted. He opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of custom-cut black velvet, was a ceremonial dagger. It was breathtaking. The hilt was a complex tableau of a boar hunt, carved from what appeared to be solid 16th century gold. The blade was dark, reflecting no light, but the pommel was the centerpiece, a single cabochon-cut emerald, the size of a man's thumb, glowing with a deep, verdant fire. "The Augsburg boar dagger," Albrecht said, his voice hushed with a performer's reverence. "From the workshop of, well, I am prepared to stake my entire reputation on this. I believe it to be by Hans von Augsburg himself." Clara felt a flicker of sick admiration. It was beautiful. It was 1,000 times more convincing than the Augsburg seal that Rennet had tried to pass. The patina was perfect. The craftsmanship was exquisite. This was not the work of a clumsy apprentice. This was the work of a master. "May I?" Clara asked. "Of course, my dear. You are the expert now, are you not?" He beamed, his eyes twinkling. Clara pulled on a pair of white cotton gloves, a deliberate, slow ritual. Her hands were perfectly steady. She lifted the dagger from its case. It was heavy, the balance perfect. "It's stunning, Professor," she said, and her voice was a perfect imitation of awe. "Isn't it?" He preened, stepping closer. "The provenance is a bit muddled, as these things are, but my expertise confirms it. It is genuine. A piece like this, it would anchor Mr. Thorne's collection. A $50, perhaps $60 million piece." He had named his price. He was closing the deal. Clara held the dagger under the vault's harsh, white lights. She tilted it, her face a mask of professional concentration. But inside, her mind was a whirlwind of academic data, a high-speed X-ray. First, the emerald. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. The Garden of Inclusions, was a classic, textbook pattern for a high-grade stone from the Muso mines in Colombia. "It's a magnificent stone," she murmured. But her mind screamed. This dagger is supposedly from 1540. The Spanish had only just begun their brutal conquest of the Muisca people. A stone this large, this clean. It wouldn't have made it to an Augsburg workshop for at least another 40, maybe 50 years. The trade routes simply didn't exist. It's an anachronism. Second, the gold work. She ran a gloved thumb over the carved tusk of the lead boar. The grooves were sharp, impossibly sharp. No 500-year-old piece has edges this crisp, she thought. Not even one buried in a vault. There would be wear. Softening. This was cast, and not from a hand-carved wax mould. She leaned in, so close she could fog the gold. There, on the underside of a carved tree branch, she saw it. Micro-layering, the tiny parallel striations, visible only under magnification, that were the unmistakable signature of a 5-micron resolution, 3D-printed wax cast. Third, his signature. She brought the hilt close to her face, as if to inspect the maker's mark. She wasn't looking. She was smelling. It was faint, almost undetectable, but she knew it. The sharp, acidic tang of potassium sulfide, bound with a specific, resinous shellac ethanol binder. His recipe, the one he had shown her on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in the Heidelberg lab, laughing as he aged a piece of bronze 50 years in 10 minutes. The true artist's trick, he'd called it. It gives the tarnish grip. She had him. On 3 counts, Clara placed the dagger back on its velvet bed. The clack of the metal on the case was the only sound in the sterile room. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. "Professor," she said, her voice clear and carrying, "you're right. It is a masterpiece of deceit." Albrecht's smile didn't vanish. It froze, a grotesque mask of warmth. I beg your pardon, Clara." "I'm not Clara," she said, pulling off the gloves and dropping them on the table. "Not your dear child. I'm Ms. Weber, the woman who is about to end you." His face went pale, a mottled, sickly white. "Now listen here, young woman. Your tone is... It's a very, very good fake, Ernst," she said, and the use of his first name hit him like a physical slap. "Better than the Augsburg seal. Rennert was just a salesman, but you're the artist, aren't you?" "This is an outrage," he blustered, his voice rising, but there was panic in his eyes. You're accusing me." "Accusing? No, I'm telling you." Her voice was a clinical scalpel, dissecting his work in front of him. "The emerald. It's Colombian, from the Muso mine. A textbook, post-1560s stone. But this dagger is supposedly from 1540, a 20-year anachronism. That's a D+, Professor. I expected better." "How dare you? You know nothing of—" "And the hilt," she cut him off, her voice gaining power. "The chasing, it's not hand-tooled. It's from a 3D printed wax mold. I can see the micro-layering. You're getting lazy in your old age, Ernst. You used to be a stickler for detail." You... He was speechless, his face turning from white to a deep, apoplectic crimson. "But my favorite part," she said, leaning in, "is the patina. Your signature. The shellac ethanol binder. The one you taught me, the one you showed me, the one you used to frame me." Silence. A heavy, absolute void. He knew. He knew he was caught. "Checkmate, Professor," Thorne's voice whispered in her ear. Albrecht's body seemed to deflate. But his eyes changed. The kind professor vanished, replaced by something cold, ancient, and full of venom. "You ingrate," he finally hissed, his voice a low, trembling roar. "You were nothing. A barback's daughter from a village with one stoplight. I gave you Heidelberg. I gave you a life. I gave you access to greatness. You gave me $500,000 in debt and a criminal record," Clara countered, her voice ice. "You were a threat," he roared, slamming his fist on the table. The dagger jumped. "You and your methods, your chemical analysis. You were too close. You were sniffing around my work. Do you have any idea what it's like? To be a genius? To be the only one who can see? The only one who can create?" He gestured, trembling, to the dagger. This is better than the original. I am a better artist than Hans von Augsburg ever was. But the world doesn't want new masters. It wants old ones. It wants a story." He advanced on her, backing her toward the wall. "So I give them a story. I am the most respected man in my field. I decide what is history and what is not. I am a god." "You're a thief," Clara said, her back hitting the cold steel wall. "A common, arrogant thief. You used Mason to publish your forgeries, and you used me to take the fall. It was brilliant. Until today." "I will destroy you," he shrieked, his face contorted into a mask of pure, primal hatred. He lunged, his hands not for the dagger, but for her throat. He never reached her. The vault door hissed open. Agent Davies and two other men in dark, identical suits moved with a speed that was terrifying. They were on Albrecht before he had taken a second step. He was seized, his arms wrenched behind his back, and he was slammed face first against the steel and glass wall. The thud was sickening. "Professor Ernst Albrecht," Agent Davies said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion as he snapped a pair of cuffs on the man's wrists. "You are being detained on behalf of the Thorn Preservation Trust on suspicion of international fraud. Interpol has been notified." Albrecht stopped struggling. He hung limp in their grasp, his tweed jacket twisted. "As we speak," Davies continued, "the German Federal Police are raiding your workshop in Heidelberg. And just so you know, Mason Rennert was arrested by French police in Monaco 2 hours ago. He's already talking." The fight went out of him, all of it. He was just an old, tired man in a tweed jacket, cuffed to the wall of a bank vault. He turned his head, his cheek pressed against the steel, and looked at Clara. His eyes were no longer full of hatred. They were just empty. "You," he whispered. Clara smoothed the front of her suit jacket. She stepped away from the wall. "The truth always has the best provenance, Professor." She turned, walked past him, and didn't look back as she exited the vault, the heavy door hissing shut behind her. The new Weber wing of the Thorn Trust was open to the public. It wasn't a gallery of masterpieces, it was a gallery of failures. In the center of the room, under a stark, white spotlight, were 2 pedestals. On one was the Augsburg seal, on the other, the Augsburg boar dagger. The plaques beside them did not list a date or an artist. They detailed, in unflinching forensic detail, every anachronism, every chemical flaw, and every 3D printing mark. The name of the exhibit was Masters of Deceit, the Albrecht Forgery Ring. Dr. Clara Weber was at the front of the gallery, leading a tour for a group of graduate students from Columbia's art history program. She was the professor now, in every sense of the word. "Dr. Weber," a young, eager student asked, "how did you ever spot them? They look perfect." Clara smiled, a small, genuine smile. "We're trained to look for beauty. We're taught to look for the story the artist wants to tell. But the forger always forgets one thing." She tapped the glass case of the boar dagger. "The truth. It always leaves a mark, a chemical trace, a historical impossibility. You just have to be brave enough to look for what's wrong, not just what's right." Jacob Thorne watched from the back of the gallery, a rare, proud smile on his face. Clara finished her lecture, the students erupting in applause. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer a ghost in a uniform. She was Dr. Clara Weber, and when she walked into a room, the art world held its breath. The most powerful person in the room is often the one nobody sees. Clara went from being an invisible waitress to the most feared name in the art world, all because she refused to stay silent. She didn't just expose a fake, she exposed the man who ruined her life and took back her future. What did you think of Clara's comeback? Was her revenge on Professor Albrecht justified? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of justice and revenge, please hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves a good twist, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have new drama stories coming out every single week, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Thanks for watching.